Good afternoon and welcome to our briefing today from Seminole County. Today with me is Sheriff Dennis Lemma, who will be up here talking with you all in just a little bit. We also have Glen Casel, who is the CEO of Embrace Families Incorporated. We are kicking off April is the start of Child Abuse Prevention Month, and Glen is going to tell us and talk to us about some of the challenges and things that are going on in the community right now. I want to take the opportunity to first thank all of our businesses as well as our residents who are doing a great job in taking personal responsibility. They're staying home as much as they possibly can. They're working from home. Our businesses now under the new emergency order are actually doing what we've asked them to do. So we're very thankful for that. We will continue to monitor it. I also want to try to put a lot of folks' minds to ease. You know, look, we're all in this together. Our staff, fortunately, we are daily, if not hourly, talking to the infectious disease people, the epidemiologists, our own medical staff, the sheriff's office. You have a whole group of professionals that are working behind the scenes, monitoring this every moment. And Alan Harris, our emergency management director, is literally working around the clock, answering calls. His staff is answering calls for things coming in. So we are on top of it the best we can be on top of it. I know a lot of people want certainty. I think I'm included at that. A lot of us want certainty in this whole thing. Unfortunately, as I've stated before, these are waters yet to be navigated, and we ask for your patience and trust that we're doing everything in our power to make sure the community stays safe. I also want to talk a little bit about the emergency order that was put in place to dispel some ideologies that are out there. There's been allegations or references that we're not doing enough or we're doing too much. The order that we believe we put in place is most effective, number one, for our community. Each community is different and separate and has its own set of challenges. Again, we're fortunate here in Seminole County that our residents and businesses are doing what we ask of them. In many cases, they've done it before we've even asked them. Everybody is taking good responsibility and adhering to the CDC guidelines. So again, thank you very much. We're going to ask the sheriff to come up and say a few words and keep you up to date on what's going on. So thank you very much again.
Thank you so much, Chairman, and thank you for being here. Yeah, I just want to take just a few moments to talk about kind of what we're seeing with the executive order. We've seen a handful of calls, maybe 5 or 6 calls from citizens that have identified businesses that really needed to make modifications to adhere to our new county ordinance. Those were met with complete support from the business owners, the operators, and I suspect that those calls will continue to come in. Actually, we encourage that if you see businesses that need assistance. We have not had to cite anybody for this, but I'm really serious about this. We will absolutely cite businesses for not complying with this executive order. We think it's incredibly important that people take the seriousness of this epidemic, that they understand that social distancing is a big part of the cure when it comes to not spreading the virus around a little bit more. And it's going to be important for us to communicate with the partnership with all the municipalities a best practice model for those businesses, whether it's the large grocery chains or the small mom and pop businesses. Members of the sheriff's office and the various police departments are proactively going out and making contact with all of these individuals. But 5 calls for service to this point. As we're focused on this virus and spreading, it's also important that we don't lose focus of some of the social services that we make available to our community, particularly when it comes to our partnership with Child Protective Investigations, the homeless population, our efforts here in Seminole County when it comes to combating the opioid epidemic. We want people to know that these services are still available. If you look at just the information that's coming in through the Seminole County Citizens Hotline, that's 407-665-0000. And if there are citizens that are concerned about food, shelter, housing, any of those things, we want to hear from you, because we stand ready to provide whatever assistance that we possibly can do. Because school is not in session, there is a minimized direct contact between school resource deputies, guidance counselors, and school teachers, which unfortunately results in a lot of calls to the abuse hotline. A good percentage of those reports and tips that we receive at the sheriff's office come through those mandatory reporters and those sources. I think I've said before that unfortunately the sheriff's office investigates nearly 4,000 abuse, neglect, or abandonment cases per year. I want everyone to know that those services are still available. We want to do all that we can to encourage people that see or suspect signs of abuse, neglect, or abandonment, make sure that they call us. There are services that are still available, some mental health services, crisis and peer counseling services, and some of those are offered through telehealth. It's very important that we don't lose focus on all of those things that are going on in our community. Just in the child protective investigations that are done exclusively by the sheriff's office here, we've seen a 17% decrease since the state of emergency began. So it's 1/5 less reports than what we were normally having. And again, I think that is probably because there's a lot of mandatory reporters that are not coming in direct contact with our children. We stand with a great partnership and relationship here with our Kids House of Seminole County. We continue to work with them daily. And then, of course, Embrace Families. And at this time, I'm going to ask the CEO of Embrace Families, Glen Casel, to come up and offer some remarks.
Thank you, Sheriff. On behalf of Embrace Families, the lead foster care agency here in Central Florida, including Seminole County, we appreciate the chance to spend just a couple of minutes while suddenly we are all feeling a little bit vulnerable. We are all feeling a little out of our comfort zone, to remember that amongst that day-to-day are kids that are not really sure exactly what will happen to them day in and day out. And as the sheriff highlighted, many of them find those sort of security blankets and those extra means of support outside of their home. And many of those people are not available the way that they typically have been. And so we're very fortunate to work closely with Seminole County government and with the Seminole County Sheriff's Office, who, as you already heard, conducts the child abuse investigations here in Seminole County. But similar to those other emergency management and critical kinds of services, our business goes on. And so I have just sort of 3 points that I want to be sure that you hear from your child protection or your foster care system from us at Embrace Families. First, that we have adapted our operations. Like so many businesses, adapted in a way that is unprecedented for us. So we are conducting a lot of things virtually, not just working from home, but also our interactions with vulnerable children and their families. And in many instances are conducting those virtually. We have quickly adapted a means to assess by risk those visits that we believe are safe to conduct in a virtual way. And when we do conduct a visit, we're trying to follow all of the CDC recommendations, whenever possible, having those visits occur outdoors. And when we do have to ultimately interact directly with a child and their family, taking the necessary precautions both for them as well as for our staff. We're also trying to prepare for a worst-case scenario, which could include some significant quarantining kind of incidents. So if we have a foster family or one of our group home providers or some of our children that become symptomatic or are confirmed to be infected, we need to adapt to those things and minimize that exposure the same as any of us are requiring. Ultimately, our goal remains very clear, and that is to try to ensure that vulnerable children in our community are safe and well cared for, and we'll continue to adapt as fast as we can to accommodate that goal. The second thing that I'd like to highlight is really to call out and thank not only our staff that work out there in the field, many of them arm in arm with the Sheriff's Office staff, out there still doing this important work and sometimes sacrificing or jeopardizing their own safety or their family in order to do so. And so as we call time out, to be sure we thank those that are doing that, right? And there's a lot of people in our community that now we realize the essential nature of what they do. Foster care and child protection work is amongst that crowd, and I'd like to be sure that we thank them. But I'd also like to recognize our foster parents and our caregivers that are, through all of this stress and discomfort, bringing foster children, abused and neglected children, into their home. Actually, just before I walked in this afternoon, I was talking with one of our foster families about the stress that's happening inside that home. And as all of us are coping with that in our own home, I think we can recognize how terrific they are to expand that to include our foster children. Our foster, our adoptive, and our caregivers are heroes amongst us behind the scenes, and they are hanging in there doing that work. And so I want to make sure that I recognize them. And then lastly, I just would like to highlight a couple of things that we all can do. And I'd call out to you 3 specific challenges that all of us can add onto our already full plate. First is, as a neighbor, be aware of those people that are around you. Be aware of the families and children that surround your home in a way that maybe is a little more attuned than normal. So we all know that our teachers are not day-to-day with our children. Our healthcare professionals are heavily distracted in other very important and critical activities for all of us. And law enforcement is engaging in activities that they don't normally do. Those are our 3 primary eyes and ears for child abuse and neglect. And so all of us need to be good neighbors and stewards to our children. Second, as employers, recognize that families are under an increased amount of stress. And situations may break down and explode in a way that is not normal. And we need to recognize that our families are trying to work while trying to facilitate school learning. They're cooped up and together in time frames that are not typical. And all of us need to be sensitive and show a little bit of grace and recognition to what our families are suffering. Let's not make this situation worse rather than better. And then lastly is the obvious, which is, as citizens, let's adhere to what we need to do to get through this. So as one of those many social safety nets in our community, we can hang on for a while, but it will have a timestamp. And so all of us need to recognize how important and fragile those situations are, raise to the level of the gravity of this issue, and be sure that we're doing what we can to get through and get it behind us. And so we don't need people being cavalier. We need them adhering to the county, state, and federal guidelines, and let's try to put this behind us. And lastly, as just a reminder that while the Embrace Family's offices are closed to the general public, that work does go on, and for us it remains business as usual, taking care of vulnerable children in our community. Thank you again for the chance to talk.
Thank you, Glenn, for looking out after one of our best assets and most important assets here in the community, which is our children. And speaking of children, today was the first day that Seminole public schools have done their distance learning. Walt Griffin and his fine group are working diligently to make sure this gets pulled off. They did have a couple hiccups this morning. It's my understanding that that is now resolved. I would ask that on behalf of the school board that you have patience as we work our way through this. Again, these are waters yet to be navigated. There's going to be hiccups, there's going to be speed bumps, there's going to be things that either weren't thought of or technology that maybe can't be relied upon, but I'm assured that the school system is on top of it and moving forward. Again, I want to thank everybody for being here. I want to thank the media for being here and helping us get the message out, as well as the fine staff at the Sheriff's Office, all of our community partners, our emergency management people who are really on the front line, as well as all of our medical professionals who are feeding information so we can make truly data-driven decisions about policy. With that, I'll open it up for questions.
So obviously you had the executive order that you guys
Yes.
Thursday, of course, you were all saying that you thought everybody was doing a pretty good job, and you were kind of giving the community a big pat on the back. And by Friday, clearly you had obtained new information that there were some pockets that needed fixed.
Correct.
We're only a few hours into this. Do you like what you see so far?
So far, what we're hearing and seeing is great. The sheriff's office has been out on the street educating people, helping them understand. We have put out social media. We've allowed opening up and sent direct information to the businesses. The businesses want to do the right thing. You know, people have to have groceries. They have to have supplies. And allowing that to occur in a managed way not only is better for the health and welfare of the community under this crisis, but what we're hearing from our business people, it has actually helped them in some occasions from having a mob overrun those supply chains. I think the sheriff, as he indicated last week, a lot of people are going to the same store 5 and 6 times a day just to find paper goods. So now, you know, with the business partners limiting that, I think this is going to be much better overall. But we continue to monitor that, and we have a lot of tools in the toolbox, and our emergency management people will do that feedback constantly.
The difference between social distancing order and stay at home in your words, please, and when would that change in the near future here in Seminole?
So stay at home, I can't give you that definition because it seems to have a lot of different definitions. I think on the face, I think the purpose of that is to try to convey that people should stay at home. But when you actually look at some of these orders in and around the state and the country, you have a lot of exceptions. By example, many of the stay-at-home orders do not limit how many people could enter a grocery store. In our scenario, which is social distancing, we have penalties for that. But let's take example if the maximum occupancy of a building is 600. So now you can only have 200 people in there. So is it better to have 200 patrons fighting over produce or foods or paper goods, or is it better to have 600 in there mobbing trying to get to the same thing? By maintaining that and making sure the businesses are staffing to make sure people are keeping the 6-foot distance, that can be accommodated under the 30% rule.
Do you foresee applying a stay-at-home or a more severe measure?
Well, we continue to always monitor, but the reality is this: people need food. People need supplies. They need things to take care of their babies. They need things to take care of the elderly. They need things to take care of the children. Staying at home, well, I don't know that you can actually get an ironclad stay at home. I don't foresee it's in the American fabric that you can put people inside of a house and say, don't open your door and don't step outside. It's unrealistic. I don't think that anyone has the staff or the personnel to ever police such a thing. Again, most people that are able to work from home are staying home. Most people are not trying to go do things. They're watching Netflix or something to keep them occupied, but they still need to go out and have services or things performed. But likewise, they need to get out and enjoy some fresh air, maybe take a walk on the trails or the many parks we have here in Seminole County. If they do that, keeping a social distancing of 10 people or less and keeping that 6 foot, I think everybody's doing a good job so far, but we continue to monitor it. Anything else?
Sheriff Lemma, can you address about where there are some people that are still gathering in areas? I know you guys took down basketball nets at a lot of the parks, but people are still finding basketball courts at schools and things like that. Can you address what you guys are doing to try to disperse these social gatherings that do?
Yeah, so I think that there's a lot of confusion with terminology when it comes to stay-at-home orders, social distancing orders, and all of this. I would argue that I think that the order that we put in place is probably a lot more restrictive for any gatherings of large people. And let me just take a moment to explain. The majority of businesses in Seminole County are not operating. All of our restaurants are takeout only. There's nobody going in there. The people who come up are actually just going up, calling ahead. Somebody's delivering their food to the parking lot. So in Seminole County, as you drive through the county, there are no locations where people are gathering in large numbers. It's not in the churches. It's just nowhere that is going on, except prior to the order, the grocery stores. And I would argue that in other jurisdictions, without restricting to 30% capacity, without restricting to gatherings of less than 10, and without making sure that people remain 6 feet apart from one another, people are just gathering in large circles because of the necessity to go out there and get whatever goods. So the order that we put in place allows for anybody to call us, or proactive law enforcement observations. If there's a playground that the city or the county says playground's closed, and somebody tears down that sign, goes out there and is playing a game of basketball with 15 people, every one of the 15 people will first be notified that you're violating the county ordinance. If they go back and continue to play basketball, they're all going to potentially face a $500 fine. When we give warnings, we are documenting those warnings in our documentation system here at the Sheriff's Office. So if Dennis Lemma receives a warning in Altamont Springs, and then later receives a warning for doing the exact same game of basketball in Sanford, that's not going to be another warning. It's going to be a citation. Now, I will tell you, people absolutely need to stay home. I think that that's kind of missed with social distancing orders, and people absolutely need to stay home. But that's not a reality when you got to go out there and you got to feed your family. You got to get these goods, you got to get these essentials. So when you go out, stay away from other people. And I will tell you that we're going to monitor this. Alan Harris is an unbelievable emergency manager. I mean, he is on top of this, and I am absolutely convinced if the time comes where we need to be reevaluate or to be really more enforcement related, the policy group will come together and kind of look at that now. But when we drive around the county, again, there's only 5 calls of violations, and most of those were not actually violations. They were businesses that were exempt by the executive order. And even with that, we went out and educated the people, hey, listen, this is all of us doing our part. This is a very interesting time because every time we found crisis and emergency, the tendency is to go out and help your neighbor. Well, the only way we help our neighbor right now is by not going out and helping our neighbor. We got to stay home. And I want to make sure that that's not lost. We're telling people to stay home when you can.
So for clarity's sake, you said you had 5 calls, but 0 warnings.
I think we had like 2 warnings. Okay. 2 warnings out of the 5. The other 3 were exempt.
Excusable. Right.
But even with the ones that are exempt, we go out there and try to educate them. Because if there's something that works in one business, I'll give you an example, like the grocery stores that may be out there. It is hard to walk up and down an aisle in a grocery store unless the traffic is one way and not violate the 6-foot rule. So something as simple as directing traffic down the aisles one way as opposed to 2-way traffic could potentially minimize the spread of this epidemic. Offering paper goods on the outside when available. And I will tell you, when I go into the stores, nobody wants to be socially awkward and say, please, can you stand back from me? Sometimes a store or a business that puts that sign up makes it then socially acceptable to kind of keep your distance. So this is what we're doing. We're trying to do the best we can with the information that we have from the CDC. And up until this point, we feel pretty comfortable about those decisions.
To add to that, on our way here, we spotted a nail salon and spa. A group of people were just doing their nails.
No, we're going to close them down. Tell me where they're at, and I'll send somebody out there right now. They should not be doing people's nails. They should not be cutting people's hair. They should not be doing tattoos. Now, if they want to sell gift cards and some of the items that are on their shelves, that is absolutely fine. But if they are absolutely touching people, that's a clear violation, and we're going to warn them. And if they remain open, we're going to cite them. And if they continue to do that, we're going to close them down. That's what we want people to report to us.
We even have the footage of it. It looked like it was functioning like a regular day.
Yeah, well, that's not good. That's not good.
Are you looking to take on
We're at full staffing here at the sheriff's office. And I think when it comes to the law enforcement ranks, we have really benefited from our school resource deputies not being assigned to the school campuses. And in our scenario, we have, maybe 60 deputies that are assigned to those areas that have now filled spots on the road in patrol. We also have a minimized court schedule, which allowed for court or judicial deputies to also go and backfill. So we're not in a critical need right now. Actually, we have very few vacancies here at the sheriff's office, but when we do go to fill those vacancies, I absolutely will be looking to people who are experienced and interested to come back. The learning curve for them is much shorter. And actually, I hope that order, I haven't read it myself, but I hope that stays. I'd love to be able to hire back retirees. I think it's incredibly important to get people with experience.
Sheriff, can you characterize those businesses from those 5 businesses and maybe what they're doing that you kind of?
Yeah, so one was a drive-through fast food restaurant that had a couple of employees gathered at the window that were next to each other and bringing food to the cars. And one of those employees allegedly wiped his face or something like that. So somebody that was in line for the fast food called and said, hey, there's 2 employees that are standing next to each other. One wiped their face. So we went in there and kind of informed them. The others may be medical locations where people are going for walk-in treatment, and there's the lobby. Some of these lobbies in these doctors' offices are incredibly small, and it's hard to kind of abide by that. But again, everyone that we've made contact with is doing all that they can to ensure that they meet these guidelines.
And the 40%, you talked last week about crime being down 40%. Do you see that trend continue or maybe even get better?
Not as significantly. The 40% has been decreased to 16%, and it is still much lower than it was before, which is kind of expected. So that trend is there. Another thing that I want to just mention here is this. We focus on the numbers. Now we're more than 80 confirmed cases. Those are just the people who went out and got tested. Do you realize that the likelihood of this virus to be out and about on people who have never been tested is probably very likely? So I think we got to treat everyone as if potentially they had it or were carrying it, and not just focus simply on the numbers. The numbers are the best thing for us to gauge what's going on and what's happening here locally. But let's not forget that there's people who will have this, that it will run its course, and they'll never go and get tested. And that's incredibly frightening.